Hi, welcome to day 10 of our Labor Act Challenge. Today we are discussing section 10, which deals with the calculation of remuneration and basic wages. This section applies when, for any purpose of the Labor Act, it is necessary to determine the applicable hourly, daily, weekly, or monthly rate of pay of an employee whose remuneration is based on a different time interval, or who is remunerated on basis other than time worked. Now, briefly, what this section says is that it seeks to provide for how one can actually calculate to convert the hourly rate of an employee to either weekly, or the weekly rate to either hourly or daily, or to even monthly, or even converting a monthly rate to a weekly rate, or vice versa to a daily rate. Now, this is usually done because of things like having to pay for an overtime, because you need to understand, if a person has worked 2 hours of overtime, you will not be able to calculate it in terms of the Labor Act without knowing the hourly rate. So this section seeks to teach us how to actually make those conversions. Of course, after knowing the hourly rate, then that's the only way you'll be able to apply the formula for calculating overtime in terms of the Labor Act. Now, in terms of the section, if an employee is remunerated on a basis other than time worked, that employee must be considered, for the purpose of this section, to be remunerated on a weekly basis. And that employee's weekly remuneration, or weekly basic wage, must be calculated as follows. Calculate the total amount of remuneration or basic wage earned by the employee during the immediately preceding 13 weeks of work, or if the employee has been in employment for a shorter period, that shorter period of work, and then divide that total by the number of weeks the employee worked to determine the employee's average weekly remuneration or basic wage. So let us say that, for example, the past 13 weeks, an employee has earned a total of 7,800 Namibian dollars. So what happens is you take the $7,800 and divide it by 13, which is the number of weeks, and then you get a weekly rate of 600 Namibian dollars per week. And if it's less than 13, another example, let's say the past 3 weeks the employee has earned a total amount of 2,400. So what happens is you take the 2,400 Namibian dollars and then you divide it by 3, which is the number of weeks. And then it will give you 800 Namibian dollars per week. So meaning that you have determined the employee's weekly rate. To determine the comparable hourly, daily, weekly, or monthly remuneration or basic wage of an employee who is paid on an hourly, daily, weekly, fortnightly, or monthly basis, we will now use the table in section 10. According to this table, if an employee whose remuneration is set by the hour, to calculate their daily rate, multiply the hourly rate by the number of ordinary hours of work each day. To calculate weekly rates, multiply the hourly rate by the number of ordinary hours of work each week. And to calculate the monthly rates, calculate the weekly rate, then multiply the calculated weekly rate by 4.3.3.3. Employees whose remuneration is set by the day, divide the daily. In order to get the hourly rate, divide the daily rate by the number of ordinary hours of work each day. To get the weekly rate, multiply the hourly rate by the number of ordinary hours of work each week. And to get the monthly rate, calculate the weekly rate, then multiply the calculated weekly rate by 4.3.3.3. Employees whose remuneration is set by week, divide the weekly rate or calculated weekly rate by the number of ordinary hours of work each week. And to get the daily rate, divide the weekly rate or calculated weekly rate by the number of ordinary days of work each week. And to get their monthly rate, calculate the weekly rate, then multiply the calculated weekly rate by 4.3.3.3. And then for employees whose remuneration is set by the fortnight, divide the fortnightly rate by 2 times the number of the ordinary hours of work each week to get the hourly rate. To get the daily rate, divide the fortnightly rate by 2 times the number of ordinary days of work each week. To get the weekly rate, divide the fortnightly rate by 2. To calculate monthly rate, calculate the weekly rate, then multiply the calculated weekly rate by 4.3.3.3. Now, employees whose remuneration is set by the month, to get the hourly rate, divide the monthly rate by 4.3.3.3 times the numbers of hours ordinary worked each week, and then to get the daily rate, divide the monthly rate by 4.3.3.3 times the number of days ordinary worked each week. And then to get the weekly rate, divide the monthly rate by 4.3.3.3. Now, we don't need to memorize this table, we just need to understand it so that every time we want to calculate the hourly rate, you just go to the table and you see what formula to apply without having to memorize it. Now, please note the following definitions in relations to this table below, that was just discussed. Ordinary hour must not exceed the maximum number of ordinary hours referred to in Section 16 of the Labor Act. We have already discussed, we will be discussing Section 16 soon. And ordinary hours do not include overtime. Ordinary days means 5 days if the employee works a 5-day week, 6 days if the employee works a 6-day week, or the number of agreed days if the employee works less than 5 days a week. Now that brings us to the end of section 10. Let's engage, let's contribute, let's discuss, and let's learn together on either one of our platforms, whether it's on our Instagram or whether it's on here on YouTube. Thank you.